everything you get of the rest of the country is in the wrestling magazines. Well, now you log in, Google search pro wrestling, and there's more information than you can absorb in a lifetime out there.
Yeah.
Much less all the DVDs and cable shows and all the rest of it.
Right.
By the way, I just mentioned DVDs and VHS tapes. I don't know if you're aware, or maybe your listeners aren't aware, Pro Wrestling Illustrated was the first to the market with a wrestling videotape.
Lords of the Ring, right?
Lords of the Ring, that's right.
We actually use a snippet of that in the intro to the podcast.
Awesome, I love it.
Gordon Soley putting over the magazines. Yeah, that was one of my favorites.
I think we beat WWF to the market by, I think, 6 weeks. But we were the first one out there. I'll tell you a quick story about the videotape. There's a piece of tape on there. I think it's a Tully Blanchard match. And so we were producing this tape, and we're in the studio, and Gordon is doing voiceover for this piece of tape. And he's in the sound booth, and he's doing what Gordon did so incredibly well. I mean, he was just amazing. He gets in there, one take Gordon, and he does the voiceover and steps out of the booth. And I said, I want to try that. Because I'd seen this piece of videotape, 20, 30 times while we're producing Lords of the Ring. I said, I want to try and do a voiceover of this wrestling match. So Gordon said, all right, just get in the booth and do your best Gordon Soley imitation. So I get in the sound booth and I put on the headphones and I try pathetically to do voiceover for this 2-minute piece of match tape. I got such an appreciation for Gordon Soley, for Jerry Law, for all these guys. The announcers that call matches, not just wrestling, baseball, play-by-play, all the color men. That is tough.
Sure.
That is really tough. And anybody who doubts it, I challenge you. Go put on the headphones, get in a booth, and try and do it, and make it sound smooth, and make it sound authoritative. It is incredibly difficult. So I gained a huge appreciation for Gordon and everybody like that.
It's
just from that couple of minutes. It is. It's a very special talent.
When you talk about that tape that obviously featured matches from all different territories, that's another place that strikes me that you saw the business change a lot in your time in the magazine, where toward the end of your run there, the territory system was basically gone, right? How much did that affect what you guys were doing? Where in your early years there, I imagine you could fill a magazine with stories from all over the country, and toward the end, you were really just dealing with, I guess, 2 companies. And I don't know if ECW had kind of come on the rise toward the end of your run there, but even they weren't much of a player. You were really talking about WWF and WCW toward the end there, right? Exactly.
I mean, like I say, early on, it was, okay, well, we have 5 stories in this magazine, so we need a WWF story, an NWA story, we need a Texas story, we need a Kansas City story, AWA, you sort of try and have everybody represented. But toward the end, 2 major groups, and even after that, one group sort of on the wane, and pretty much 80% of it all was WWE. Part of it you try and say, okay, well, we have to have 2 WWF stories in this book, so we'll try and do 2 very different types of stories. If a wrestler was with WWF and had just left to go to another promotion, boy, that was good. We like that because, here's somebody who had been getting a lot of TV time and a lot of visibility, and WWF cut them loose, but, we'd love to do a story on that because we're kind of riding on that visibility. They're still very popular. So, we would try and do stories like that as a way of covering the other territory, but still maybe getting some of that WWF popularity mixed in there.
Right.
Yeah, and then trying to do more theme stories, so to say, versus personality stories.
Yeah.
So you maybe do a little bit more on I can't even think of a good example at the moment, but the dream match stuff, or things that were sort of wrestling generic as opposed to WWF specific. So you try and come up with stuff like that.
What do you remember about the competition with other magazines, whether it was Wrestling Eye or the other ones? I mean, did that get heated at times, or did you guys always have a big enough share of the marketplace that you didn't pay much attention to them?
Oh, we paid attention to them all the time. I mean, we got them all in the office. We kept binders of them up on the shelves. You know, we paid very close attention to what everybody was doing. But there was never any heat. I mean, George Napolitano was sort of the Bill Apter of all the other magazines. It's a bit of a simplification to say that, but sort of not, if that makes any sense. So yeah, I mean, George and Bill and I, you know, before we got kicked out of Madison Square Garden, the three of us would be, you know, next to each other, taking pictures of the matches. You know, go down and shoot Kerry Flair in Texas Stadium. All three of us are on the ring taking pictures. Very friendly. You know, it's a very friendly sort of atmosphere among the people that worked there. Freelance photographers that worked for us, they'd occasionally provide material to George. The writers, generally, you know, if you were a writer for us, you were a writer for us. If you were a writer for the other magazines, you know, you wrote for the other magazines. But aside from that, there was really no heat, I don't think, among the, you know, between the companies. I mean, we looked at, actually that was one of the, an impetus for Wrestling, I guess 83 was the first one, then it went to Wrestling 84, Wrestling 85, but our version of, you know, the color Slick magazine sort of grew out of George's Wrestling's Main Event. Right. I mean, we saw that. That was slick paper, it had color, and, you know, as editors, we looked at that and, oh man, that's great. You know, we're black and white on pulp paper. You know, we want slick paper and color. Let's do that.
Yeah, so but you know what? I always, I think even as a kid, you recognize the difference in quality of, I don't know if it was even journalism at the time, but I think you knew the Weston mags as the big leagues, and I think even the stock of the paper and the print had something to do with it, as far as maybe that black and white feel being more kind of newspaper-like, and the fact that there was a lot more text than in the other magazines, which were largely photos. I think it just had a kind of an air of legitimacy of major league to it, you know.
Yeah, you know, I love hearing that, and I guess thank yous are in order. I think it speaks to something I mentioned a little while ago, which is that, you know, we weren't wrestling fans doing wrestling magazines. We were magazine professionals, editorial professionals doing wrestling magazines. Yeah, I mean, lots of us were wrestling fans too, but we were editorial professionals, publishing professionals first and foremost. So we were always pushing for better paper, always pushing for better layouts, you know, always pushing to do something interesting on the cover. You know, always pushing, you know, when we started getting some new technology in the office, and, you know, we would start doing some Photoshop things on the cover that were interesting. We put a painting on the cover. You know, we really always trying to push the envelope a little bit, and I think that probably came through in the finished product and helped us stand above the others.
Did you become a fan? I mean, it's one thing that strikes me. So you go in there, you really did you even know some of these people? Had you heard of a Hulk Hogan or Ric Flair? And after all those years there, did you leave as a fan of wrestling?
Boy, that's a great question. I came in not as a fan. I had been to the match. My brother took me to the matches once or twice when I was growing up. I remember seeing Bruno in, might have been the Island Garden or Nassau, probably before Nassau Coliseum, probably the Island Garden. But I wasn't really a fan. Like I mentioned, when Peter King called me for the interview, he said wrestling magazines. I kind of went, ugh. But, you know, when I got there, I very quickly came to understand how good these guys were, for the most part. You know, the best were just phenomenal, but how good they are at what they do. And I came to appreciate what it was about what they do that makes a fan a fan. And did I become a fan of wrestling overall? I don't know if I'd go that far. I became a fan of certain wrestlers. I became a fan of personalities. I became a fan of the business, so to say. Yeah. So I think I got there. I'd be interested to see if you agree with me on this. I think my big takeaway about what makes pro wrestling interesting to people who are interested in pro wrestling is that on a certain level, you know that things are absolutely 100% real and legitimate, right? A guy jumps off the top rope, he's hitting the canvas. Right. You know, if he's hitting knee first, that knee could get blown out. Right. On the other extreme, you know that, okay, this guy may not hate that guy once the cameras are turned off. He may not hate them all that much. So you know that there are these two extremes. What you don't know is where is the line between what's absolutely true and what's not so absolutely true, right?
Right.
There is that line, and that line changes constantly over time, and the line is in a different place for this wrestler than it is for that wrestler, and so in the dance of that line is, I think, where the fascination of pro wrestling comes in, and the beauty and the attraction of it. That's where Andy Kaufman, right? Andy Kaufman was a gigantic wrestling fan, and he took that principle and applied it to comedy.
Right.
That what is this guy for real? He can't be. Well, maybe not. You never knew where that line was with Andy Kaufman. I think that's what made him successful too.
And you got a story on that, right? I mean, from what you sent me in the Box Brown comic,
that's right.
A small part of history there.
That's right. Yeah, Bill Apter, and I know Bill is working on a book. I don't know if that's. I guess that's known out there, but I know he has a book coming out in the not too distant future. And one of the things he talks about is how integral he was to the whole Jerry Lawler, Andy Kaufman thing. And yeah, Bill and I were there in Andy Kaufman's hotel room the afternoon before the famous appearance on David Letterman. We were there that night taking pictures of it, and they wound up over AP the next morning. But yeah.
Wow, yeah, that's being there for a bit of history. Do you remember when you were there in the Letterman studio then? Did it pretty much play out as you expected?
It kind of did. Here's a funny thing about the Letterman studio. I don't remember specifically. So this was 84? 83 or 84. I got the mix. I think it was 83 or 84. So here's a weird coincidence story about that. So I don't really remember being in the green room and watching the show. As sort of in the haze of memory, it all sort of comes back. Yeah, I kind of remember that. And he threw the coffee, and that was pretty awesome. And we had to. I do remember kind of scrambling out of the green room to get to AP because we had to get the film developed and we had to get the pictures out on the wire. But the other guest on that show before Lawler and Kaufman was Stephen King. And so I'm in the green room, and I'm watching the show, and I probably chatted with Stephen King's publicist at the time, a couple of words here and there. This was 83. Well, fast forward to 95, it turns out that publicist in the green room I met for real. Then, not a casual green room meeting, but I actually met later on, and that was the person that was my entree into the world of Feld Entertainment.
Oh wow!
Because she was Feld's national publicist.
Yeah.
At the time, so yeah, we were talking about that one day in David Letterman, and I said, yeah, I was there for the Kaufman-Lawler thing. He said, well, I was there too. So a dozen years before we met.
Wow.
That's sort of my memory of that green room experience. But and the scramble to AP to get the photos developed and out to the papers.
Were you working for AP at the time also, or you had an arrangement?
No. It was just it was just an arrangement. Bill hooked up with somebody at AP so we could supply them photos.
Yeah.
And I think PWI got the credit.
Okay.
When it went out over AP, which was kind of cool.
Yeah. Anyway, I could talk all day with you. Thank you so much for doing this. There were some things you wanted to talk about that you're doing now.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you had mentioned the Box Brown art that I had. I don't know. I would want to recommend Box Brown. I live in the suburbs north of Philadelphia right now. And Box Brown is I'm big into comic books and graphic novels and all that stuff. And Box Brown is a Philadelphia artist who came out with a biography of Andre the Giant.
I have it right in front of me.
It is fantastic.
It is.
I loved it. And so when I found out he was a Philly guy, I have a very, 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 very small collection of original comic art. But I contacted him and I said, listen, do you do commissions? And so he said yes, and I commissioned him to do sort of a one-page review of my pro wrestling magazine career, which he graciously did, and it's awesome. I love it. But I mentioned that only to mention that the Andre the Giant bio is one of the best wrestling books of anything I've ever seen out there. It's fantastic, so I would highly recommend it to everybody. The other thing, I'm involved full-time employee of Bank of America, and I got my family, and my son's graduating college in a couple of months, and my daughter's getting married, and all that good stuff is going on. But I also do some work with a fantastic nonprofit called the Semper Fi Fund. And so the Semper Fi Fund is and they have a program called America's Fund. What they do is they provide immediate financial assistance and lifetime support to post-9/11 wounded and critically ill service members. Semper Fi is for Marines. America's Fund is for all other branches. And they focus not just on the injured service members, but also the families. And their pledge is to stay with them for a full lifetime if necessary. And I would encourage anybody and everybody listening to this to check out the Semper Fi Fund on the web. They have a 4-star rating from Charity Navigator. Only 4% of all nonprofits get a 4-star rating. So Charity Navigator is a watchdog organization. They make sure that the money's going to the people who really need it. Charity Watch is another one. Semper Fi Fund has an A+ rating from Charity Watch. They're one of only 3 veteran nonprofits to get that rating. And the reason they rate so highly is their overhead is about 6%. So that means 94 cents of every dollar they get goes directly to the people who need it, which is unheard of in the charity world. It's phenomenal. So,
you can't ask for better than that. Yeah.
And thank you for the opportunity to mention them, because they do amazing work, and I'm always happy to give them a plug.
Terrific. Well, thanks so much, Craig. I expect that we will have you back on. It sounds like you
would
can
love
do this
to.
all day.
It's fun to talk about this stuff.